Well, here we are at episode 40. Chucky with you as always, and Jigsaw as well.
It is indeed your boy Jiggy.
Yeah, 5 more movies. What have we got for today?
As always, we are for quite an interesting lineup tonight. We start off with the 2006 slasher Dark Ride, following that up with a 1976 classic, Burnt Offerings. Then, for our non-horror of the night, we have Howled Ticket to Hawaii from 1987, sort of an action-y-esque movie. Indeed. Then we have Alice, Sweet Alice from 1976. Also, you may know it as Communion, depending on, well, what you know it as. And then we finish off tonight with The Devil's Rejects from 2005. Sequel, of course, to House of a Thousand Corpses. And, well, yeah, it's a movie.
I like with your alternate title for Alice Sweet Alice, depending on, well, what you know it by.
I know, I have quite a way with words. So, we start off with Dark Ride. Basically, these college kids have a I think it's either spring or fall break, I forget. So they're going someplace and they think, hey, this might be a good idea to save on money. Let's go to this abandoned dark ride, which is sort of like one of those haunted house roller track rides you might see at amusement parks. The cheap but always fun. So one of the characters, one of the friends, says, suggests, hey, let's just go here, save on money, it might be cool. They pick up a hitchhiker, they go, and then things start happening because there is a dark past in that dark ride. And there is a dark past that may impact all of their lives. Yeah, so Dark Ride is it's a movie. It's it's a movie I actually used to enjoy back in the day. I can't quite say when I first saw it, but I enjoyed it the first few times I saw it. Picked up on DVD. This is my first time watching it in quite some time, and I have to say I don't think it stands up quite as well as it did when I was younger. I'm not sure if it's just because it feels somewhat run-of-the-mill, but I mean, it's decent as some of the kills. There's just not that much to this movie, I feel. It's like a been there, done that type of thing, and I don't know if there's really that much about this that stands out, like, hey, this is like the only movie that's done that type thing. I mean, I don't know, there's decent things about the movie. The cast is reasonably good, but it's not a movie that I was this time around I wasn't wild with this one. What's your history of this one? Have you happened to see this one before?
Yeah, I bought it on Blu-ray at some point years ago, and I guess just because of, it was a cheap slasher movie, I'll just buy it, and, if it's good, that's great. If it's not, I didn't spend much money on it. I can't recall if I actually saw it well before that as well. I may have watched it, maybe shortly after it came out, maybe rented it from the video store, back when video stores were around, but I can't recall. Anyways, yeah, I mean, fairly similar thoughts on this one. It is a bit of a run-of-the-mill, mid-naughty slasher, whatever you want to call that decade. The kills in the movie are actually pretty decent. There's some decent gory kills in there, so if that's your thing, there's a few of them in there, especially one during a blowjob, which is, interesting. Yeah, I mean, the killer, it's got a very typical type of backstory, I guess, that you'd expect from a cheap slasher movie. The mask he wears is pretty creepy, I guess, so that's something. Yeah, the cast is okay. I wouldn't particularly say any standouts. I mean, there's this one ginger kid, Bill, who I know from some 90s movies like The Sandlot Kids and Son-in-Law. So, seeing his face is, I mean, it takes you back to some nostalgic 90s times, I guess.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning the same guy, Patrick Rana. He was also in one of the best episodes of the X Files. So that's when I see him. That's like the thing I immediately go to in my mind.
In fact, I think I recall him in one of those National Lampoon comedy movies. It might have been Dorm Days, and I'm pretty sure he had like this crusty jizz rag. It was, I don't know. I don't even remember the movie. I just remember that one moment, and
Of course you do.
I get to attribute it to this ginger guy. There's a couple of decent scenes in the movie. Probably my favorite is one of the earlier scenes where they meet this old man in a gas station, and the ginger kid was, talking to him, and he's not really saying anything, and then later on the other guys go in. I think they said something about, like, who do I have to blow around here to pay for some gas? And he just pops up out of nowhere and, gives them this really speedy speech on answering all their questions. And then at the end, he's like, so, how's about that blowjob? That was a nice, funny moment.
Yeah, he was certainly one of these stand-up performances.
Give that man the Oscar.
I think, at least for me, one of the more interesting may not be the right words, but I do appreciate the setting of the movie. Like I said, it's like just cheap carnival horse, K ride type things. It's nothing that's original, because if anybody's seen the Funhouse, Tobe Hooper movie from the 80s, it's pretty much the same thing. But it's, I don't know, it has a little charm to it. It's not like it makes the movie, because I don't think, like I said, I don't think it's that much to it. But, I mean, hey, it gives you, again, slight sense of nostalgic value right there. So, if you've ever been through one of those rides, you can't forget them.
I did enjoy particularly, I think the blonde guy in the movie, or he's got the ice tips, or whatever you want to call him. It's almost like a very early 2000s hairdo that, you just look at this guy and you immediately know roughly what time period this movie's from. I think he's also got like the chain wallet and everything. So there was a scene particularly where they pick up this hitchhiker. In my notes here, I put her down as like a budget Sherry Moon, which is kind of a coincidence since we're talking about the Devil's Rejects later, but they pick her up in a similar way to, I guess, House of a Thousand Corpses. She's this blonde hitchhiker, is a bit zany, and she goes off on this huge speech, and this blonde guy's just got this like blank look on his face with a cigarette in his mouth. I don't know, it's just funny.
Yeah, I have to say, she was probably one of my favorite characters. At least she knows how to have fun. And she even has mushrooms and such. You can't go wrong there.
Oh my god, I love you.
Although I'm going to say this, the driver should not be taking hallucinogenics. You should. It's not safe. Just wait until you get someplace, then take them. That's Jakey's advice of the night.
Yeah. One funny thing, not to do with the actual movie itself, but it reminded me of something very funny that happened to my daughter and myself one time when we went to kind of like a carnival type thing. They had this one ride that was, well, it's supposedly some sort of scary ride. You don't really know what it is because all the scary stuff's inside. And so, okay, my daughter and I went on it. Basically, they put you in a cart, they push you in, and essentially what happened inside, they push you inside. The place inside is completely dark, and by completely dark, I mean pitch black. You cannot see a goddamn thing. And so what happens is this guy behind you just keeps pushing you until you get through to the other side. Now, the only thing that actually happened inside was the guy would randomly, maybe 3 times throughout the whole thing, he would turn a flashlight on with a clown mask and go, "Bleh!" And that's it. And it didn't scare either of us at all once. And so, they push us out. We finally get to the end. And look, you probably don't know the look that our faces had, but the best description of it, like, you probably won't know this because it's a Simpsons reference, but there's this one episode in The Simpsons where Bart and Lisa get pushed through, or like they go on this ride that promised to be super scary, and it was just, it was a similar type thing. Like, it had a few tacky things, and then they come out the other end, and they just got their arms crossed with a very disappointed look on their face, looking at the guy who, you know, sold them the ticket. And he's just like, sorry. And it was a very similar thing for us. But, and look, you know, rides at carnivals, they're not cheap. I'm pretty sure we paid like $15 to go on this ride. And even if I had paid $2, I would have been disappointed. But, you know, looking back on that, because my wife brings it up constantly as well, because even though she didn't go on the ride, she got to see our disappointment as we got out. And I said, look, at the time, I was really annoyed that we paid $15 to go on this stupid ride. But looking back, that I have so many memories, or at least, you know, so many times where I've got to bring up that memory, which is a funny memory. And the memory was worth the money. Not the ride, but the memory.
So this has been life lessons with Chuck.
Yeah.
I have to say it sounds like a somewhat horrible ride. But
Yeah. The moral of the story is, if someone offers you a horrible looking ride, take it.
But I guess luckily, Dark Ride is not a horrible ride. It is simply not a particularly worthwhile ride. It's an okay movie. There's amusing scenes, amusing characters. The gas station guy he's funny. Like I said, the hippie chick is also quite amusing, you know, in a stereotypical hippie type way. Like Chucky said, her rambling rant during her first scene it's pretty decent. And the facial expressions are certainly on point. I think Dark Ride's okay. It's not like I would never watch it again. I just didn't do that much for me this time around. I think the ending is, I wouldn't necessarily say predictable, but at the same time, it's not like one of the most masterful plot twists ever done. I mean, if you paying attention, you can sort of see it coming. I mean, it's okay. It's just like I said, it's like by the numbers. So I'm thinking of giving this one like a 6 out of 10, which is below average, but it's not like horrible. But you know, it's if you like slashers, you might have an okay time with it. But it's just not really necessarily worth going out of your way for.
Yeah, I was tossing up between a 5 and a 6 after I watched the movie, and I think my wife convinced me to give it a 6, just because. Even though she didn't love it, she just said, you know, it's okay. So, yeah, 6 out of 10 is fine for me. I think the cast is okay, but the characters themselves are pretty generic. They range from either, there's maybe 1 or 2 who are just kind of unlikable, and the rest are more or less uninteresting for the most part. The twist at the end is also a little bit corny, but, you know, it's a cheap slasher movie. Whatever. It doesn't really change my overall thoughts on the movie. Yeah, it's just okay overall. One thing I did forget to mention earlier, there's one scene right towards the beginning where the ginger kid and one of the other guys, they're talking while walking down a hallway in a school. And the funny thing about that scene is, right at the start, because they begin right inside of these big doors, and you can tell that they were just told action and then start walking, because like the doors weren't swinging open, they weren't walking in through the doors, they were literally stopped just inside the doors and started walking as soon as the scene started. I don't know, if anyone watches this movie, check it out and see if you feel the same way about that.
You should make me want to rewatch that part then. Then I have to find my DVD again.
Up next we have Burnt Offerings from 1976, which is about a family who spends their summer vacation at an old but nice mansion for an insanely cheap price. but they also have to look after an 85-year-old woman who supposedly never leaves her room. There were some concerns before taking up this offer because, why is it so cheap to rent this massive, nice-looking mansion? So there's something not quite right about the situation, and weird things start happening, and we'll leave it at that for now. I saw it the first time not all that long ago, to be honest, probably a year or two ago, and I don't know why it took me so long to watch it, but when I did first watch it, I was quite surprised with how decent the movie was, and watching it again, I still felt pretty much the same way. I guess the one thing is that, and this is not really an issue with this movie, it's an issue with any movie that does this, but whenever they slowly build towards something, that build up is just a little less special the next time you watch it, I feel. And I think that's the case with this movie, is that it's got a satisfactory but slow build up, which leads to a really good ending in my opinion. So overall, I do like the movie, it's just repeat viewings it feels like it's just not going to be as special as the first time.
Yeah, that's probably true. My case is, I guess, slightly different. I've seen this movie a couple of times before, but it's been, let's say, between 5 and 8 years since I've last seen it. So I remembered a few portions of the movie, but to be honest, a vast majority of it I just didn't remember. So, it was really nice coming back to this one, which made the build up, just as probably impressive as it was the first time I saw it, because I didn't even remember necessarily how it ended. The thing I really enjoy about this movie, and this is a movie I find legitimately fantastic, the atmosphere throughout the movie, and it's about a 2-hour long movie, it's a bit of a slow burn, but the atmosphere is just fantastic. There's a whole bunch of tension in the house. These family members slowly going a little more unstable. You have the mother who's obsessively trying to walk around the house and trying to help the old woman, and then there's a father who just gets more aggressive throughout and throughout. You have, the father's aunt who is slowly becoming more and more tired and just exhausted. It's just a lot of small things that really work to build the suspense here. And then once you get to the ending, it's like all out chaos, Even though the ending is necessarily I don't know. I wouldn't go out of my way to call it amazing, but I do think it's a very quality ending. Plus, I guess I should also mention the cast here is really good. You have some fantastic actors and actresses, Karen Black and Alfred Reed, giving some great performances, but my favorite probably being Bette Davis. And she didn't do that many horror films to begin with. And the one she did do, this one, Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, and probably Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, it's all fantastic work. So even if you're not necessarily a fan of haunted house type movies, hey, check it out for the classic actors and actresses.
Yeah, the cast in this one's good. And Karen Black's got one of the weirdest faces I've ever seen in Hollywood, I guess. I can't... Yeah, no, I'll just leave it at that. She's got a weird face. One of the earlier scenes when they're talking to the owners of this mansion or house, whatever you want to call it, I'm pretty sure that's the guy that is Rocky's trainer from the Rocky movies. So immediately I'm like, you can trust this guy. He becomes a trainer later on. He's a good guy, so there's no cause to be concerned about this.
Yeah, so ironically, I've never actually seen any of the Rocky movies, which is probably not a big shock. But that being Burgess Meredith, who I know mostly as playing Penguin from the 60s Batman series. So it's just sort of funny seeing him in this type of role. And he's sort of a little playful, so it's not like it's altogether different, but it's fun.
Yeah. I will say that Oliver Reed's diving is something very special. That's something everyone needs to see. End review. Well, look, I mean, I won't go too much into what actually happens in the ending, but I will say it does pose some similarities to another movie I really enjoy, Insidious. Similar ways to how that ends. Not entirely the same, but yeah, it's just got some similarities, and so I really enjoyed the way they went about it. And I mean, talk about a payoff. I think it's a pretty good payoff for what it was a pretty slow build.
Yeah, and I think that'll probably be people's main complaint. Might be a bit strong, but I can imagine this movie turning some people off. One, by the fact it's about 2 hours, and two, that it takes a little while to really get going. I think there's enough substance in the movie to keep you entertained. It's not like there's no scares throughout. There's a pretty intense scene between Oliver Reed and his son in the pool. And the Oliver Reed's character, he also has some dreams and visions throughout the movie with my all-time favorite character. So it's not like there's not scares throughout, but it does take a while to really get to, I guess you could say, the meat of the story. Even so, though, I think it's a pretty entertaining journey, and I can imagine people not necessarily loving this, but I can't imagine somebody watching this and thinking, oh god, it's a horrible movie. I mean, I'm not going to go and say it's the best horror movie of the 70s, but it's like, I think, an easy top 25.
Yeah.
Oliver Reed's character has visions throughout the movie, and they relate back to the death of his mother and the funeral thereafter. And it focuses primarily on the chauffeur character, a driver of the nice fancy car his family apparently has access to. And the guy, he's played by an actor named Anthony James, who I don't personally know from anything, but he has such a pale and creepy face, and his smile, just fantastic. He pops up, throughout the movie as visions and such, and every single time he was on screen, I remember the first time I saw this movie, I actually legitimately jumped during one of the times he popped up on screen, because I thought he was just so creepy. And to this day, I think I have his face as something on my Twitter profile. I think it's a fantastic look and very memorable. It's simple, but it's very memorable, and I think it's a fantastic addition to this movie.
Yeah. Well, after I watched this movie, I had a look at the special features on the Blu-ray, and I think it was that guy, because he had a very unusual looking face. They had a interview with him where he talked about basically his career, I guess, and he was talking about how he felt he had a lot more to offer in terms of the type of characters he could play, but because of his face, he was pretty much always limited to playing characters that would suit the type of face that he had, so...
Yeah, I can imagine it's quite easy to get typecast.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a DVD from... I forget when my DVD copy came out. It has to be like at least 2006. It's quite old. It doesn't have much in the way of special features. It does have the a trailer to this movie, which I was like watching the trailer after I see the movie. And this trailer, it's like a 2.5-minute trailer. Pretty much any scene worth watching in the movie is in the trailer. And I can't imagine the disappointment, seeing that trailer, go to see the movie, and hey, was it really worth it?
So in other words, just go watch the trailer.
Yeah, I know that it's a complaint with some modern day trailers that they show too much, which is, I in particular, I remember one of the Purge movies had a trailer, and I think it just showed way too much about the plot. But it's sometimes easy to forget that maybe some of the trailers of the olden days also went a bit overboard.
Yeah, so Burnt Offerings. I had a pretty good time with this movie, both the first time and the second time I watched it. As I was saying, it does move at a somewhat slow pace, but look, as long as you're still engaged enough, the ending more than makes up for it, in my opinion. So I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. For a moment, I would consider an 8, but you know, as I do, I think of other movies that I've given 7s and 8s to, like one of the first ones we talked about, Neon Maniacs. And I think, do I actually like this more than Neon Maniacs? And the answer there is probably no. So, and I gave, even though I struggled between a 7 and an 8 for Neon Maniacs, I ended up going with a 7. So, because I don't enjoy this more than that, I must give this a 7.
I have to say it's somewhat strange. I'm trying to compare Burnt Offerings and Neon Maniacs. I get it. I get it.
Yeah, I'm just comparing how much I enjoyed the movies, not how similar they are.
Yeah. So this movie, if you're a fan of some of the classics of the genre, this is a movie from 1961 called The Innocents, which is a fantastic movie, definitely worth watching. Movie from 1963 called The Haunting, which is a movie I personally don't love, but it has a lot of similarities to this movie. You know, sort of a spooky house. You know, it seems like the house isn't letting people leave. It may not necessarily overtly be anything supernatural going on for a good portion of the movie. So, I don't know, this really reminds me a lot of the 60s haunted house type movies. It's very much worth watching. The cast is fantastic. The build up to the ending is fantastic, and well, pretty much everything's fantastic. I'm going to give this one an 8.5, and I think I'm going to round it down to an 8 out of 10. It's definitely a 70s movie. I mean, just think about the best 70s movie you could name. It's better than that one, so.
It's definitely better than The Evil.
That's also true. Because that one actually has a somewhat similar idea behind it. And I was thinking about that one also. And talk about a movie that does it. Anyhow, yeah, so if you have a choice between The Evil and Burnt Offerings, I would recommend Burnt Offerings.
That's right. Stay away from The Evil. It's not good.
Although it does have Victor Buono, so if you enjoy him.
There's some, like, fan out there of The Evil listening to this and is, like, seething right now. They're like, oh, these fucking guys.
I know. But hey, if it makes them feel better, it's just not a good movie and they should find a better movie to enjoy. Speaking of a better movie to enjoy, what do we have up next?
Yes, so up next we've got Hard Ticket to Hawaii from 1987, which is... It's connected to Malibu Express, and there's like 10 other movies after this. So I guess you can call it a sequel. But this one is about an undercover DEA agent and her civilian friend who stumble upon a drug trafficking operation, and they have to enlist the help of all their colleague friends to go after the vicious drug kingpin. So anyone familiar with this movie or Andy Sidaris movies in particular, we pretty much know what they're about or what we're going to get. We're going to get some action, some topless women, just corny 80s, 90s, action where you're not really looking for Schindler's List or anything like that. It's bullets, bombs, and babes, that type of thing. So, this is the second time I've watched this movie. Some of the movies in the series I've watched, some of them I haven't yet, and so we're going to eventually get to those if we can. And I quite commonly hear people bring this one up, so I'm guessing this is kind of one of the more beloved movies from the 12 in this connected series.
I'm not entirely sure that bodes well, but...
Yeah, I don't know. I will say that this one is in every way better than Malibu Express, in my opinion. I'm not going to say it's, a great movie, but it's definitely better than the one before it.
Yeah, I'm going to actually piggyback after that thought for a second. So Malibu Express had a side plot with the main character getting into drag races with this one hillbilly family, because I guess it's funny. But this movie had a side plot with a killer snake, poisonous snake loose on the island. Now compare side plots and you know you have a winner in this one. In fact, arguable this movie is a horror movie because that killer snake was pretty vicious. Um, it's probably not horror, but the goofiness of the whole snake thing. First of all, it came out of nowhere. I guess nothing to do with the drag ring. It's just there to. Well, I'm not sure why it's there, but it brings something special to this movie.
It's one of those things that the movie didn't need, but it's just great to have it in there.
Yeah, like it's just ridiculous. Like we see a few scenes of the snake attacking people, and of course, if you're familiar with the ending, and somewhat amusingly, I was able to watch this movie on YouTube, and when I first looked up the name of this movie, How Ticket to Hawaii, one of the first search results I got was snake ending. I'm like, oh hey, that sounds interesting. There's a snake in this movie, so it's certainly amusing. Like it's not good. So like I said, it looks ridiculous. But I have to imagine that's going to be a common theme with this guy's movies. Like this movie had a lot of really amusing moments. One of my favorites being the skateboarding scene.
Yeah.
Just because the idea of using a bazooka to take out a guy on a skateboard's a bit much. But hey, that's just me.
Talk about excessive force. And not only do they blow him up with a bazooka at pretty close range in midair, they also blow up the sex doll or whatever that was that he had, like separately.
Yeah, so it's like if you're not familiar with this guy's movies and you're just going into it, it's goofy. Of course you get nudity at completely random times, like the two main women just topless in a hot tub talking about diamonds, and then
I like how their first thought after they were being shot at and chased was, let's get in the jacuzzi.
yeah. And then you have even like more random sequences, such as I'm not even sure if this guy had any important part in the story, but the whole sportscaster guy, when he's interviewing these two, I'm assuming they were football players. That scene, just a small random scene, just also cracked me up.
Yeah, I'm gonna lose my job. Yeah, it's just over the top, and there's so many things that are just unnecessary that, though, just kind of make the movie amusing. One thing that I did like about Malibu Express was a lot of the, like, just amusing quips that would just be said randomly. I mean, they wouldn't happen, like, every few minutes, but every time they'd pop up, they'd usually get a giggle out of me. Like, I always remember the, that one guy who looked at the naked picture and was like, that's what we call hard evidence. But in this one, like towards the beginning, there's these guys, after they lose those diamonds, they go back to their kingpin boss, whatever you want to call him, and he's like angry at them, and the guy says, calm down, we got some bad news. I'm like, hang on, calm down, we've got bad news? That doesn't make sense. But then after they tell him what happens, he said, if brains were bird shit, you'd have a clean cage.
Yeah, that one struck me as being well, it's both inventive and amusing.
Yeah, so, and there's quite a few of those throughout the movie, and it's just amusing whenever you get to see things like that.
I do want to say, one of the reasons that I personally got more enjoyment out of this one over Malibu Express was, I mean, it's a bunch of things, but one of its main points was sort of like a mystery of, hey, where are these Russians getting computers and stuff I literally didn't care about. This movie, luckily, isn't so much a mystery as just like a action movie, which is, I know, to me it was a lot more fun, and it felt a lot more enjoyable to watch. I mean, you even get like a pretty decent, like, taking down a compound type thing near the end, with a fantastic frisbee death. And just overall, just a, lot of firefights and fun, and I love how they apparently forgot all about the main guy just driving away, and then, oh hey, how about that guy?
Yeah, that I actually had a note down about that. I just put down, oh wait, we forgot to kill the bad guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy at least one of them were thinking.
Another thing that makes this movie better than Malibu Express really is just the period in which it's filmed. Malibu Express says it was from mid-'80s. To be honest, it almost feels 70s to me. And I mean, I grew up in the majority of my growing up was done in the late 80s, early to mid 90s. So that's the period that, I mean, in terms of, the women in the movie, I mean, I'm sure if someone grew up in the 70s or whatever, they'd probably be beating off to Sybil Danning, but I'm not, who was, she was in Malibu Express. So I think it's just the period of which this movie falls into just, it just suits me better than Malibu Express, which, even though it says it's from the mid-80s, felt like a 70s movie.
The question is, would you dress up as a woman to spy on people?
Well, in fact, well, no. But that's another good thing to bring up, because I think that actor was also in the previous movie, but though I think technically a different character.
Was he really?
Yeah. In fact, he also played a crossdresser in Malibu Express. He was the guy who was getting blackmailed or attempted blackmail.
Oh, like the gay
in
husband.
the limo. Yeah. Anyways, yeah. So that guy's back in this one. Just I think a different character, but I will say makes for quite a believable woman.
Yeah, I mean you can sort of tell, but I mean honestly, that's one of the better attempts I've seen. I sort of wonder how long exactly he's been doing that, because I was thinking that scene in which he's taking off the makeup, like a girl literally just walks by, before he starts taking off the makeup. Like I would do that type of thing in like a more secure location. Like that just seemed super risky.
Yeah. And I should also just mention, because I mentioned it in Malibu Express, that the director/creator of all these movies, Andy Sidaris, he did make a little appearance in Malibu Express, and he makes a few appearances in this one too, including one scene where, kind of like these amusing quips that I mentioned earlier, he's talking to one woman, talking about how he's no longer obsessing over the women's body or something, and then immediately a woman comes up and asks what he'd like, and he's got his face staring right at her boobies, and he says, "I'll have a pair of coffee." So, I don't know if he appears in every single movie. I guess we'll see if we manage to get through all of them. But, yeah, it's just something to point out to people there, because I'm sure there's some people out there who watch it and just don't even realize that, hey, that's a guy that makes these movies. Yeah.
One thing I sort of appreciated, well, I'll say the ending, part of the ending seems somewhat, I'm not sure what word to use. It just seemed a bit quick. Like they take care of the guy on the island, and then the guy has an overboss, and they go take him out. Just a quick scene of them going to the building, and like it's not necessarily that suspenseful, at least to me. Like it's obvious the guy has a sword and they brought guns. Like I think we know where it's going.
I think they just felt like that somehow wrap up the story in a nice little bow, so they're like, oh, we still got this one guy who was in one or two scenes earlier.
They could have waited to the sequel. That'll make it like a more long-lasting. That'll be an interesting idea. I'm not sure if any of the movies do that. I'm assuming they do to some extent, but I really don't know. So I'm sort of curious. But then one of the last scenes of the movie is like almost like a picture copy of the end of the first movie, where they're just sitting on the yacht and talking about, an epilogue type thing, which I sort of appreciate. It was I liked it in the first movie because it explained a few things a bit, but this movie is just sort of fun, and like, I'm a civilian and I found it, so it's mine. It's playful.
Yeah, so as I was saying earlier, this one is in every way better than Malibu Express. It's got plenty of over-the-top action, plenty of tetes. There's just a lot of fun to be had here. It's still not, an amazingly well-made movie, but if you go in just expecting to see some babes and some ridiculous things, you're probably going to come out of this one at least not disappointed, I think. So I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10, and hopefully some of the later movies also keep it up and are even better. We'll see.
Yeah, so this obviously is my type of. I don't go out of my way to watch movies like this, but I had a pretty enjoyable time with this one. It's still it's still probably a little bit more lighthearted than I would prefer, but like Chucky said, it's certainly a lot better, more enjoyable than Malibu Express. So I'm thinking a 6 out of 10. I wouldn't have any problem watching this one again, especially to see the classic Snake, because those scenes alone are totally worth it. So next up, we have the Apple classic Alice, Sweet Alice / Communion. And I only bring up the alternative title because I actually generally know the movie as Communion, but I know Alice, Sweet Alice is a much better title, so there you go.
Yeah. Well, when I watched this movie, it actually came up with the title Communion.
Huh.
So there you go.
So,
and I've got the recent Blu-ray release of it, which is a fantastic release, by the way. Picture quality is about as good as you get for a movie from the 70s.
Indeed. And especially this movie is a bit on the lower budget too. So pretty much Communion follows a mother and her 2 children in the early 1960s. One of her daughters gets murdered by a mysterious assailant before she takes her first communion. And many suspect it was the other sister, who's sort of like the bad seed type sister. The husband, the mother and husband have divorced, but he comes back to, get with his remaining child. Try to figure out, hey, who called, who. Sorry, I got a bit out of myself.
Calm yourself.
He came back to figure out, hey, who killed my child? So for most of the movie, it's like a mystery, like, hey, who was it actually the little sister who killed his child or not? And we find out who did it. And then the rest of the movie sort of follows a more, a procedural path. It's a very interesting movie in my opinion. It's one of those movies that was probably going to be called a cult classic nowadays. I've seen it maybe 2 times before, but much like Burnt Offerings and pretty much like any movie I've seen, it's been quite some time since I've last seen this one. So it was nice to get to see this one again, because out of any of these movies, I was most excited to watch this one again. And I think it's a lot of fun. It's from the 70s, so it can maybe feel a bit dry at times, the way that some 70s movies happen to feel. But I think there's enough interest here, there's decent suspects, and I don't know, there's just a very authentic vibe to this one, which is, I think, partially helped by its lower budget, but it just feels like, I don't know, to me it feels like a quality piece of 70s cinema.
Yeah. I mean, I've tried watching this movie in the past, and just for one reason or another, not really to do anything with the movie itself, I've just always had a tough time completing it. And I mean, I was saying before the show that I had a tough time completing it while trying to watch it last night because I was just really tired. And so I kept falling asleep throughout the movie. Nothing to do with the movie itself. It's just I had to rewatch it 3 times just to kind of say that, okay, now I feel like I've watched the movie. And I like the movie enough. There's definitely some good aspects to it. I mean, there's some slasher aspects to it. And I think the ending to this one is pretty good. Pretty memorable, at least for me. But like you said, there were also its share of dry moments, I thought. So even though it didn't particularly wow me, I did... Well, I mean, the ending wows me a little bit, but overall as a movie itself, yeah, I had a decent enough time with it. I just wouldn't say it's one of those movies that, now I'm watching this every year, but I'll certainly keep watching it a few more times, and hopefully the next time I watch it, I'll be fully awake and I can appreciate it in its full presentation without having to, skip back and watch parts that I missed out on.
Yeah, so aside from slashers, one of my favorite subgenres of horror is giallo, which is an Italian subgenre, which is primarily mystery, but many of them have slasher aspects. Many of the most famous giallos are considered proto-slashers, such as Bay of Blood and many of Dario Argento's stuff. This one is one of the few American movies that almost feels like it has the same type of atmosphere as those Italian movies of the 70s. And in fact, I'm pretty sure partial influence of this movie came from, I guess, the more mystery type, stories of giallos. So I want to bring that because the atmosphere to this one doesn't really necessarily feel like that many American proto-slashers I've seen from this time period. Even though it's very distinctly American, because it's just watching this from a modern day perspective just sort of blows my mind. On a side note, just seeing how low tech hospitals were, for instance, I don't know, even like things like the refrigerators and stuff. Everything looked so odd, but I don't know, it has a feeling to it which I really appreciated, and it's something I may not necessarily be able to properly put into words, but it's certainly one of the few, I would use the term probably proto-slashers, maybe a slasher, that is actually, I think it's legitimately decent. I guess my main issue is once we find out who the killer is, there's still 30 more minutes to the movie, which is interesting because that's not really what you expect. I somewhat wonder if maybe the identity was revealed a bit early, but at the same time, from a story perspective, you can understand why they did what they did. And I guess we do learn a little bit about the character that makes it, I guess, mean more. And it leads to some suspense for scenes. I think after that reveal, the next 15 minutes aren't that great, and then, like Chucky says, it sort of picks up toward the ending to give us a pretty good conclusion.
Yeah, the coffee scene. I mean, I think we all know what would have happened there. No one makes other people coffee and doesn't make themselves a cup of coffee.
Although she had a pretty good excuse, I could buy that.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
and actually, I'm sorry, one more quick thing that I also want to mention. I was actually raised Catholic, so I did appreciate the heavy religious overtones this movie had, since it based most of the characters are Catholic and happens around Catholic religious rites. And I know I know that this movie got a lot of shit from Catholics, some people calling it an anti-Catholic movie, so I find that sort of amusing too. But I don't know, it added a little something extra to the movie that they probably didn't need to do, but it gave it a very authentic feeling.
Well, it's funny that you say that you were raised Catholic, because my family was also quite religious, and I was raised Lutheran. I don't know the exact differences, but I know there's quite a lot of similarities between the two. So I spent pretty much my entire childhood going to church every Sunday and, doing communion and eventually confirmation, all that kind of stuff. But immediately once I finished high school, I never went to church again. The only time I go to church now is if, there's a wedding or a funeral or, things like that. And that's not to say that I'm not at all religious. Well, I'm not, but I'm not anti-religious either. I guess you can just say I'm agnostic at this point. But yeah, like you said, I definitely, because I grew up, in churches, yeah, that aspect of it definitely resonated with me as well.
This is maybe a small thing, but I also loved, along with the atmosphere, there's some scenes that take place during intense rainstorms. For instance, when the father comes to the police station, or just a few scenes later, it's just like these intense heavy rainstorms, and I always enjoy. It also happened at the end of Burned Offerings 2 with Wind, but I just really enjoy seeing, I guess, extreme weather like that, because it just makes things naturally a little more tense. And it's not like it played any part to the story, but I don't know, I just seen these old decrepit buildings, and like I have no idea what type of law budget place they lived, but that city just did not look particularly healthy. But it really added a lot of character to the movie.
That fat guy is the epitome of health.
Yeah, and that guy also is a very interesting individual, based on the little I know about him. I mean, he died in 1978 at the age of 31, so he was only in 2 other movies. And and he's decently, I think he's pretty memorable. And I have happened to see the other movies he was in, but he just has a very interesting feel to him. From my understanding, one of the reasons that he got this job to begin with, he's not a traditional actor, but he was just seen by the director, and the director sort of liked the look of him, which I wanted to bring up because he went to see him. He's not your typical guy you expect to see in movies, but at the same time, they never made it like a big point to his character. You know, if they bring in a I don't even know how to say it, an unusually shaped individual, it's usually plot specific in some way. But this is just a normal, well, I was going to say normal, it's a bit creepy, but he's just a landlord guy, just trying to make his way through life, and he liked his apartment full of cats, and he apparently doesn't like cockroaches, so can't blame him for that.
Who does?
I guess one last thing, what did you mention? Even though there's not really that many deaths in this movie, there are a few pretty suspenseful scenes. Guy chasing the killer, and guy getting stabbed. One of the best scenes is probably this woman getting attacked on the stairs. She gets stabbed in the leg like 2 or 3 times. She gets stabbed through the foot. It's not like overly gory, but she crawls outside into like this pouring rainstorm and like powders of blood and this chaos. People are screaming. She's crying out. It's a very suspenseful scene, and it has almost like a claustrophobic feel to it, because this is back then there's no cell phones, they had no way to necessarily get help unless somebody called the police. So I don't know, that's probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie. But there's plenty of great scenes too, when, like, for instance, the father chases the killer, and where that goes. So I know it's certainly a movie that has feeling. I'm going to give this movie an 8 out of 10. It's not a perfect movie. It's not a movie that I could probably watch it on a yearly basis, but I probably wouldn't. It's a pretty good movie. I really like some of the themes that they have going on. It sort of reminds me in part of The Bad Seed, which is a 50s movie, which I'm not sure if you've seen. But, potentially kill a child, so... I mean, even some of the dialogue's like exactly the same. And it's a pretty good movie. I think they did an amazing job for what they had to work with. So it's certainly, if you're a fan of 70s horror movies and slashers and or proto-slashers, it's a movie that's worth checking out.
Yeah, I feel pretty much the same way. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. In terms of 70s horror movies, it's definitely above the average for me, and I assume for most people. And to be honest, I mean, I think it's one of those movies that you look at the poster for it, how can you not want to watch the movie? How can you not be intrigued by that poster?
One other thing that's actually really interesting too, and I actually learned about this while watching the movie, but apparently the individual, and I'm trying to find the actress's name, but the individual who played Alice was actually like 19 at the time. She was born in 1957, so yeah, she would have been, assuming this was filmed in 76, it might have been filmed in 75, but either way, if she's only 17, 18, 19, she does not look that old in the movie, so that's pretty impressive. Speaking of the Dallas Rejects, next up we have the Dallas Rejects.
Yes.
So, basically, immediately I think a few months passed. So, following House of a Thousand Corpses, the police have, I guess, found out enough to know that the Firefly family are, dangerous. So, they round up a bunch of police, they go to raid the house, and the family makes a last stand in the house. Other classics are there. Otis, Mama Firefly, Baby, and they get into a pretty epic firefight with the police. Lot of casualties, lot of injuries on both sides. But luckily for us, and unluckily for many people, including country singers, Baby and Otis are able to escape, and they meet up with Captain Spaulding, of course Sid Haig, and they go on a, well, they try to get to someplace safe because there's a bunch of police after them, but they also go on a killing spree too because that's just who they are. I guess before I get into this one, because I have quite a few things to say, what are your thoughts of this one? Did you happen to catch this one in theaters?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I caught House of a Thousand Corpses in theaters, and then also this one, because I enjoyed House of a Thousand Corpses enough when I watched it back then, and to be honest, I think I enjoy it more now than I did back then. But with this one, I didn't manage to catch it recently, so I'm just going off my previous viewings, and I know there's a lot of people out there who kind of feel more the opposite way. They sort of enjoyed House of a Thousand Corpses, and then they really enjoyed The Devil's Rejects, and I'm kind of the opposite way. I quite really enjoyed House of a Thousand Corpses, or at least now I do. Back then, I maybe not as much, but I always found The Devil's Rejects to be... I mean, it's not bad. It's still a decent movie. It's just... I don't know. I guess I feel House of a Thousand Corpses felt like more of a horror movie, and the horror aspect of it just spoke to me more than this one does. I think the best part of House of a Thousand Corpses was Captain Spaulding, whereas this movie tends to be more for Otis, I feel. Even though all the characters are in there, I mean, this is a movie where Otis feels a little bit different than he did in the previous movie. Like, they've just tweaked his character a bit more and put more focus on him in this one, and I mean, he's fine. I think the character's fine. It's just the focus has shifted, and yeah, I just tended to like House of a Thousand Corpses a little bit more.
Yeah, I have I do have a completely similar view, but House of a Thousand Corpses was a movie that took me at least 3 or 4 times to watch until I actually really started liking it. Now I rate it pretty highly, but the first times I saw it, I didn't get it. Not that there's necessarily a lot to get, I guess it just wasn't my taste. But even back then, I still would say I liked The Devil's Rejects more. I'm not sure if that's true nowadays. I think Devil's Rejects is a fantastic movie. I think it's fun, and I actually find the ending, I wouldn't go as far to necessarily call it emotional, but I think it's a very, very quality ending. I've not seen, on a side note, the newest movie, being Three from Hell, so I don't know how that goes, but ignoring that movie, the ending to this one, it goes out on a pretty good note. Mainly because I just love the interaction between Spaulding, Otis, and Baby. I've never liked Baby's character that much. He's just way too, I don't know, over the top whiny for me. But she has pretty good scenes in this movie. One thing I appreciate about this movie that maybe some people wouldn't is I don't know, to me, it somewhat humanizes some of these characters. I personally feel sympathy for some of these characters throughout the movie. They're chased by this cop, which they should be, they should probably be in jail. But this police officer is also using means that he should be to capture them, in my view. And there's some scenes between Baby, Otis, and Spaulding that, I don't know, it really hits me. This one toward the end where the 3 of them are sort of tied down and they're going to be basically tortured. And this guy's going to torture Baby, but then Captain Spaulding's like, hey, do it to me. I don't know, to me, it sort of shows, no matter how the horrible things is done, they have some semblance of feeling for each other. And that's just something I appreciated this movie doing.
I guess that's the other thing about it is William Forsythe's character in it. Because he wasn't in the first one and he kind of just gets thrown into it, and now he's suddenly like one of the big characters to the plot, I just didn't quite care enough about his story or like his reasoning for being in the movie. I mean, it's fine, you know, but I guess just because he pops up and he wasn't in that first one, it just you know, it just didn't do it for me.
Yeah, so I was actually I'm okay with Forsyth. I think he's fine. My biggest problem with that story is the whole Danny Trejo thing, mainly because I don't know. I just I'm trying not to get into some anti-Trejo rant, but he doesn't need to be in every movie ever made. I get it, but give me a break. Like, he's fine in this movie. I don't hate him, but the whole bounty hunter thing, I didn't care that much for. I really did like on I guess the opposing side. I liked Khan Foy's character, and here's a pretty good conversation about whether or not he would engage in carnal activities with chicken. So that's worth watching.
Well, I mean, it's been a little while since I saw 3 from Hell, but I'm pretty sure I recall Danny Trejo being in that. I can't.
Oh boy.
I could be wrong. I'm just having a quick look just to see if his name. Oh yeah, he is in it.
Oh boy.
Now I'm not sure if he's playing the same person. I think he was. I'll have to look up the Devil's Rejects just to make sure it's the same character. I think it is. I can't. Like I said, it's been a while since I actually watched the Devil's Rejects, so I'm just going off the top of my head from the last few times I watched it. I can't recall if anything happened to his character in this, and I don't think so. And I guess for people out there, Dallas Page, he plays like Danny Trejo's sidekick to the movie. I guess any wrestling fans out there will be very familiar with him. I mean, it would have been nice if he gave the diamond cutter to one of these bad guys, but hey, you can't win them all. You're probably sitting there thinking, what the hell is that?
Yeah, so I saw the name Dallas Page on the IMDb page, and I'm like, I have no idea who that is.
He's he was a pretty famous wrestler, mostly in WCW. In fact, he was probably champion of WCW for a while there. And his finishing move is a move called the Diamond Cutter, because his name is Diamond Dallas Page. That's his wrestling name. So, I don't know, it's just kind of amusing. If you think about The Rock and some of the movies he's been in, I'm pretty sure I've seen him use his finishing move in at least 1 or 2 movies.
That seems so gimmicky.
It's gimmicky, but depending on the type of movie it is, I remember him doing it in, I think it was The Rundown, which is known as Welcome to the Jungle in Australia, but it's just one of those fun action movies that, is a bit over the top, and it suited that type of movie. But, when you're watching a Rob Zombie movie, you can put some stupid stuff in it. I mean, a lot of people think the movies are stupid in any case, so...
Although, I would say this is, even if you like House of a Thousand Corpses more than this one, which is understandable because that one is obviously a lot more horror than this one, I mean, just by the feel. Devil's Rejects is still probably in his top 3 or 4 movies, I would say. Mainly because, aside from these 2 movies, how many good movies has Rob Zombie done?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say that The Devil's Rejects is nowhere near as good as House of a Thousand Corpses. I think it's close. It's just, I still prefer House over this one.
I do enjoy some of the character interactions outside of the 3 main characters. Mother Firefly, who her actress was replaced in the first movie, she was played by Karen Black. This movie, they had, what's her name, Leslie Easterbrook. I think it's a fine change. I mean, I think she does a pretty good job with her role. And she doesn't get that much screen time, but I do like her interactions with William Forsythe. Just because she, I mean, throughout the movie, she's clearly just as mentally unstable as everybody else. She might have I guess a more normal type demeanor sometimes, but I mean, she is certainly not normal. Which is pretty much, you could say the same for everybody in the family. I sort of enjoy also some of the lesser known family members such as Tiny, who popped up a few times throughout the movie. he's probably more memorable in the first movie just because of his few scenes, but I enjoyed him here. And again, I thought he had a pretty emotional final scene too. One thing I also wanted to, I guess, touch a little on is, obviously, if you've seen these two movies, you know this, but the tonal shift from the first to second movie is just amazing. The first was a somewhat psychedelic-ish slasher movie, or slasher-esque type movie. I wouldn't quite call it slasher. But this movie's more like a road trip, action-y type movie. And, of course, the Andy in the first movie heavily dealt with the character of Dr. Satan. And, of course, this movie does it bring him up once, if I recall. And I just find the idea to take a sequel and change the whole presentation, I just find it such an interesting idea. And I can't imagine it necessarily working out in that many cases, but I think Rob Zombie did a pretty good job with this movie, making it work. Because even if it feels a lot different from the first movie, the story arc the characters take seems decently realistic to what you might expect would happen.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, you get official clown business.
Hells yeah.
I appreciate though, he did give that kid quite a lot of time to come up with a reason that he hates clowns, so.
That's right. Yeah, that was amusing. And the Tutti fucking Fruity.
Yeah, that's what you say. That scene, I have to say, the first few times I saw this movie, I probably didn't care for that scene mainly because, like I said, I think Baby's a pretty annoying character. She's sort of funny when she's holding the women hostage. Like, there's a scene in which Otis is torturing one of the women, and she's just sort of in the background blowing at one of the women's hair. Just keeps blowing at her, just trying to piss her off.
Yeah.
So that's so funny. But the 2D fucking Fruity scene is also amusing, mainly, and for me, it's because that, it shows decent relationship between Spalding and Baby. Again, I guess I bring this up. I once got into a conversation with another horror fan, and the issue with this movie is they didn't think the Fireflies, the Firefly family, had any sympathy behind them, which, is something that's obviously it's a personal perspective opinion type thing. But this individual also went on to say that she didn't think the characters themselves, there's no love between Otis and Spalding and Baby, and like, dude, did you even watch the ending? Like, it's clear to me, at least as much as we're able to, there's some emotional involvement there. And it just, like I said, even though these people are horrible people, I do like the idea that they try to make them, I guess, more like people as opposed to the monsters that they pretty much were in the first movie.
Yeah, I'd agree. This movie does help bring them together a little bit more. I know in House of a Thousand Corpses, even though they did seem... I mean, they were technically a family there. It's just a bunch of random personalities, really, and yeah, it helped connect them a little bit more in this one.
Yeah, I guess on those stressful times, it bears fruit and such. Plus, it helps if you go to like this stripper type place. That also helps.
That's incredibly insightful.
Indeed, I did appreciate Confoy's character also, and his relationship with Captain Spaulding was so fun. I sort of wonder exactly how those two know each other. I'm assuming there's some type of backstory, and if not the movies, some type of adaptation somewhere. But I do appreciate how it's sort of like a I'm going to make a Star Wars reference, but I forget the character's name. So I apologize to any sci-fi fans out there. But one of the Star Wars movies, this is one black guy who sort of betrays the main people, and then he sort of makes up for it at the end, which is somewhat similar to something that happens in this movie, and I enjoyed that, even though it doesn't necessarily end well for the character in this movie, but that's just life. So, I'm going to give this movie, I think, I'm just going to give it an 8 out of 10. It's really close for me because, like I said, I really enjoy this movie, and there used to be a time back in the day when I would have given this movie a 9, if not a 9.5, because I legitimately enjoyed it. And I still legitimately enjoy it now, but I don't think I love it quite as much as I used to, which is no shame for the movie. It's just, it's a fantastic movie. It just doesn't quite hit as hard as it used to. So I think 8 out of 10 is pretty good rating.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 7. I still enjoy it enough, and I think a big part of that is just the characters returning from the first movie. And, I mean, they do expand a little bit on their dynamic with one another, but I feel like, yeah, it's just a little less horror in this one compared to the other one, and I really enjoyed the horror aspects of House. So, there's still a lot to enjoy here. Assuming you're not one of those people who just, shits on anything just because Rob Zombie's name is on it. To be honest, I think people go a little overboard with that. Yes, he does have, a certain style of filmmaking. If that doesn't suit you, that's fine. But, people just saying you make shit movies, I mean, that's not really fair, I think.
It's funny, one of the main complaints to say about this movie is the the quote-unquote overuse of vulgarity. First of all, I to an extent, I sort of get it, but at the same time, I mean, but like, what type of prude watches a movie like, oh my god, you said fuck too many times?
Yeah. They are out there.
Well, yeah, but they probably should be watching a Rob Zombie movie.